So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Innovate Lecture Series. My name is Ahmed Nasif. I'm the Programs Manager at Innovate, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the Innovate team to welcome you here today. We are excited to end the series this year with a talk on AI regulation in healthcare, a very exciting and fundamental topic in today's healthcare innovation world. But before getting into the specifics of today's lecture, I would like to make a few housekeeping announcements. So previous talks in this series have been recorded and archived on our YouTube page. I will be posting the link to these talks in the chat. With regards to the organization of these lectures, so each lecture consists of a 40 to 45 minute talk, which is followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. As you might have noticed, we're testing this new platform, Hopin. You can see who is attending the lecture by clicking on the People's tab on the right sidebar. You can send direct messages to other attendees or request to start a video chat with them. We hope you will like and enjoy the event on this platform. If you have any questions for the speaker, please use the Q&A tab, which is located under the Events tab on the right sidebar as well. Again, as mentioned, these lectures are being recorded and will be available for later viewing with French subtitles. If you have any questions on the series, please email us at innovate@sunnybrook.ca. Finally, please do not forget to subscribe to our e-newsletter at our website, innovate.ca. Due to Canadian anti-spam legislation, we cannot send you future emails about upcoming events or programs unless you have signed up for our e-newsletter and have given us consent to communicate with you. Okay, so shifting gears to today's lecture, we recognize the machine learning technologies and AI-enabled technologies present unique considerations due to their complexity and the iterative and data-driven nature of their development. Innovative regulatory approaches for these products are required to keep up with the technological advances and distribution models. We are very pleased to have our guest speaker, Mark Lamoureux, who is our speaker tonight, this afternoon, and will be discussing the regulatory requirements of some of the AI-enabled medical devices in Canada, the software's evolving regulatory landscape, as well as what is Health Canada doing in the healthcare AI space. Mark has obtained his Bachelor in Biophysics from the University of Guelph and his Master of Science in Medical Physics from Carleton University. After graduation, he worked at the Ottawa Heart Institute and spent 2 years as a medical health physicist with the hospital, where he worked closely with the federal and provincial regulatory bodies to improve the quality and safety of diagnostic and therapeutic radiation programs. Since 2011, Mark has been working in medical devices at Health Canada, specializing in technical assessment of medical software, diagnostic imaging devices, and radiotherapy equipment. He's the Vice Chair of Canada's IEC subcommittees for diagnostic imaging and radiotherapy, and he co-chairs the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, Cybersecurity Working Group with the US FDA. He's also currently Health Canada's lead for the G7's Digital Health AI Governance Working Group and is the Manager of Digital Health Division at Health Canada. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mark. Mark, thank you very much for being our guest speaker this afternoon. And I'm passing this over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ahmed. Good day, everyone. I'd like to start by sincerely thanking Ahmed and the organizers for having me today, and really those of you in attendance for your kind of interest in this and your attendance. So it's a real privilege. It's a real honor to be speaking here. So my name is Mark Lamoureux. I'm the manager of the Digital Health Division within the Medical Device Directorate at Health Canada. I've been with Health Canada for over 10 years, always in the medical device space, in the software space, in diagnostic imaging and radiotherapy space. So again, like I said, it's a real honor and privilege. So for the next 40 minutes or so, maybe I'd like to keep some time at the end for questions. So call it next 40 minutes or so. I'd like to cover 4 things. And please forgive me. The first one is simply to sort of set the stage for the actual presentation on AI, really the reason we're all here. I promise I'll be brief on medical devices, digital health, and that sort of thing. But for the meat and potatoes of the talk, I'll focus on clinical applications of AI ML. I'll explain why I use AI/ML. The regulatory considerations that we at Health Canada need to be aware of and apply when regulating this type of technology. And I think this is especially important to this audience and anyone involved in kind of innovation and development of these types of tools. And finally, I really want to highlight that regulating AI in healthcare really isn't a domestic Canadian problem. Health Canada is super involved on the global stage, and I wanted to kind of highlight some of the activities that we're working on and trying to bring to Canada. So let's get some terminology out of the way, provide a little context on what Health Canada is responsible for and really how we operate. So when I say a medical device, right, a lot of people don't know what that is. What does that mean? Well, there's a clear definition of what a medical device is in our Canadian legislation. And briefly, and that's supposed to be kind of a joke, it's a thing, but only because if you look at the law, there's like a huge definition of what it actually is. But it's a thing that's manufactured, sold, or represented for use in diagnosing, treating, mitigating, or preventing disease and in humans. That's really broad, right? And there's a reason I bring this definition up, is that people always ask, is an app a medical device? Can software alone be a medical device? What about software with a machine learning algorithm or model? And my answer is always, if it meets the definition of what's on your screen right now, then yeah, it's a regulated medical device. So we regulate a very broad range of products. And on the right side, I wanted to show that the medical devices group that I come from is composed of scientific groups in both the pre-market as well as the post-market. I come from the pre-market area, but we also have compliance and enforcement group as well as sort of an executive and policy direction group. And we administer our Canadian medical devices regulations. On the bottom of this slide, I'm showing that the products that we regulate are based on risk. They're classified based on risk. So for example, class 1, right? It's a Band-Aid. A Band-Aid is a medical device, right? It diagnoses, treats, prevents disease. Our technical teams, our scientists don't review test reports for Band-Aids, right? We will, however, spend days or weeks assessing comprehensive testing on a new image-guided radiotherapy device, for example. Which would fall kind of under class 3. And briefly, we're the group responsible for authorizing medical devices before they enter the Canadian market. That's kind of where my team comes in, as well as taking regulatory actions while they're on the market, right? That's the post-market group. So no medical device can be sold in Canada without our authorization. So scoping it down a little further, digital health. So I come from the digital health group. I lead the digital health group. If you were to Google the definition of digital health, you'd find a ton of different definitions. And really for us as a medical device regulator, our definition has to be constrained to medical devices. So for us, digital health sort of means policies and products, the products that we regulate, make healthcare more accessible, that improve or facilitate more timely diagnoses, and really foster that remote healthcare, and that might be patients at home, that might be patients in rural or remote communities. And in 2018, Health Canada created a new digital health division, right? And we planned it, and we really wanted to increase its capacity, our capacity for regulating this digital health tech, right? Including software as a medical device, right? A piece of software that fits that medical device definition, but it's just purely software. It's not hardware at all. To address aspects of medical device cybersecurity, which I won't talk about today, but that's another hat that I wear, as well as to move forward on policies on AI-enabled healthcare products, right? And to sort of bolster our expertise in that area. So that was 2018. I added a link there in case you really care about the group and want more information. But so we're primarily a group of physicists and engineers responsible for, and software experts responsible for doing pre-market technical assessments on devices, all in diagnostic imaging, radiotherapy, and digital health. And since 2018, we've really been active in stakeholder engagements, events like these, as well as being somewhat of the interface between the product or the technologies and the policies that Health Canada comes out with in regulating in this space. So I'll leave it there, but that's essentially where we come from in digital health. So I've been around for a while. Maybe the gray hairs show that I've been around for a while. But what we've seen over the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, and by no means does this arrow capture really every exception. But this slide is meant to demonstrate a general trend that we've seen, call it over the past decade, as it relates to medical device software. And as we all know, software's been around for a while, but like back, let's say 10, 15 years ago, in the medical device world anyways, software was more or less used to control medical devices. So I have on the screen here, CT scanner control software, right? As we move forward in time, past those controlling hardware devices, we started to see more emergence of software as a medical device. So again, that's software only that fit that definition of medical devices. And even further, we're now seeing more emerging tech. We're seeing AI and machine learning. We're seeing different delivery models, cloud computing. We're seeing software as a service. In reality, in a digital health world, gone are the days of, let's say, a 3-year development cycle. I feel bad that I always kind of make this comment to, the artificial hip industry. So forgive me, but gone are the days where there's like a long development cycle where a tweak to a medical device, goes through this long, grueling process of R&D, testing, regulatory approval, and that would be like a 3-year cycle. Right now, the pace of development's astounding. Right, the novelty of some of the innovations makes it really difficult to regulate, and in some cases, there's really no precedence for some of the decisions that we have to make. And really, some of these devices require near continuous updating, right? We all know, but what if you had a medical app, right? And Android makes a change, and you have to keep up with that change. So in the digital health world, regulation, it has to look a little different to account for some of the different characteristics of the technology. Okay, so the rest of the talk's on AI, and let's get more terminology out of the way. And many of you may have seen this type of diagram, at least in various forms. And this is a relatively old diagnostic imaging publication from 2017, but I think it really nails the definitions. It essentially shows that machine learning is a subset of AI. So it says that artificial intelligence is a subfield of computer science devoted to creating systems to perform tasks that ordinarily require human intelligence. Wow, that's pretty broad. Reading that, I'm thinking, okay, Roombas, right? Or maybe a robot that brings you a beer. I wish, right? But that kind of definition really is super broad. Now let's look at machine learning. Machine learning is a subfield of AI where computers are trained to perform tasks without explicit programming. Aha, that's typically what we mean as regulators when we talk about AI. Algorithms that train on data and presumably get better at their tasks with exposure to more data. That's what we're talking about when we talk about AI, at least in the healthcare setting, or at least that's what I mean when I speak about AI. I won't speak about representation learning or deep learning. I only say that they are further subsets of machine learning. And if there are any experts out there or purists, you may have opinions on representation learning, but that's outside the scope of this talk. But I do have to apologize, right? I have been, and I will be, speaking about AI quite a bit. However, I use the terms interchangeably. I use AI and machine learning interchangeably. So again, I apologize. I just want to make a note that typically in the sort of regulated medical device world, I typically am referring to software that has employed some sort of machine learning. That's why we write AI/ML. It's AI, but more specifically, it's machine learning. I like to just break the tension here a little bit. Keeping the mood light. I have to drive my point home with a cartoon, and I have to give credit to two sources. One, firstly, the artist Sans Serif, who actually drew it about not AI. He actually drew it about a software bug, right? You find a bug, you frame it, you call it a feature, but it was actually modified by an AI cloud executive at IBM to show exactly my point in super simplified analogy. You frame a relatively dry topic like stats, you call it machine learning, but when you're talking to an audience, you call it AI. So anyways, I'll leave it there, but it's essentially what I wanted to nail. Okay, moving along. So what you probably want to hear about kind of our experience in AI, and contrary to some belief that kind of AI or machine learning is everywhere, Health Canada, at least in the medical device world, we haven't seen sort of a tidal wave of authorized license. we call them license applications. So essentially, a company wants to sell their product in Canada. They need a license to do so. So they need to apply to that license. So we haven't seen a sort of a tidal wave of these license applications for AI-enabled medical devices, but we've seen a huge increase year after year after year, and that's very consistent with other regulators across the world. The devices are primarily in the field of medical imaging, most typically used for image analysis. And I don't think I need to tell that audience or this audience that. I think you're well aware that that's the case. And this sort of emergence of image-based healthcare applications of AI was well known when we planned the digital health division way before 2018. That's why we have technical expertise in diagnostic imaging, in software development, in image analysis, machine learning. So I believe kind of currently our digital health group is very well suited to make some really difficult decisions, regulatory decisions on whether or not something is safe or not for the Canadian market, but also to support those policy directions moving forward, right? Because we have the experience. So one thing that I did want to highlight as well is that we haven't authorized any truly adaptive algorithms yet, right? This is where the algorithm or the model is deployed into the wild, and its performance varies with time based on its learning, and it's continuously sort of updated, or it's updated very frequently. We typically, as a regulator, right, we have to ensure that the algorithms are a known quantity, right? That they don't vary in time. And so that we actually ask the manufacturers to lock the algorithm and make no updates to it. Consider us sort of authorizing machine learned algorithms, right? But that's really not what we want to do moving forward, right? That can't continue. So more to come on that in probably about 15-20 minutes from now, because I do want to highlight some regulatory kind of agility that we're trying to put forward. So I don't want to dwell on this slide too much. This is all public information that I pulled from the internet, but I just wanted to highlight that the first technology cleared by the US FDA and Health Canada in 2017 that used machine learning, or at least that were marketed as using machine learning. Machine learning has been around for years, as most of you may know. This is a more realistic use of machine learning and that we see. And it's not the far-fetched examples that people like to talk about in conversation sometimes, right? This is a simple, automated, identification of anatomical structures, and shown to be as accurate as sort of manual identification by experienced physicians. So this was licensed way back in 2017. But I just wanted to highlight that this is a type of machine learning that we see. We don't see the autonomous surgical robots, at least not yet. And I think as a regulator for safety, that would be a considerable ask from that innovator. Okay, to further kind of drive home the point of AI being predominantly in diagnostic imaging, and again, I don't want to insult anyone in the group. I know we've got a highly qualified audience here, but I did want to highlight a 2018 publication by the Canadian Association of Radiologists, with whom we work very closely with in the topic of AI. So sort of stepping through the bullets, the publication states that some applications of AI could include anomaly detection, right? Identifying kind of the location of a lung nodule on a CT scan, for example. Image segmentation, we saw that on the last slide, defining the boundary of an organ, used a lot in radiotherapy workflows, as well as image classification, right? A binary yes or no. Is a pulmonary embolism present or not? Yes or no. And another interesting figure that they included were suggesting how an AI tool could be inserted into their clinical workflow. And for us as a regulator, that's also very important, right? It's how the product is intended to be used, right? Is this an autonomous decision-making software, or is this an adjunct to a trained radiologist? So we look to the intended use very, very closely. The existing scenarios on the left, I don't necessarily have to say that in this particular scenario. The radiologist, determines if there's a disease present or not. Second from the left, it could be used sort of in a triage scenario where the AI sits before the radiologist in the workflow. On the far right, it shows that the AI could be used as a second reader, which again makes sense to a lot of us, or at least to me, anyways. Extremely interestingly, the Canadian Association of Radiologists actually suggested that they could be replaced in that third column from the left. Now, at first glance, that seems odd. However, if you consider, remember I talked about rural and remote communities, if you consider Canada is very vast, very, very large, consider an AI trained on hundreds of thousands of cases, that AI might actually perform better than, let's say, a primary care physician in, I don't know, in a northern community, for example. Very interesting. I relied on this publication quite a bit in some of our policies moving forward. So it's not just radiology. So getting away a little bit from DI, this slide simply gives kind of a flavor of what we are hearing about and what we're seeing some limited evidence on. I won't read all of them, but some notable ones include pathology, the automation of complex and time-consuming tasks with digitized slides. So again, that sort of machine vision scenario. Dermatology, distinguishing between malignant and benign tissues. Oncology and radiation therapy, again, it's huge. It's huge in that area. Anyone who has been astro in the last 3 years or so, AI is just everywhere. Diabetes care, again, predictive algorithms to help personalize insulin delivery. Mental health is huge, and ophthalmology, right? Screening for people, for diabetic retinopathy. So this slide is based on literature and some sort of preliminary engagement with industry, but what I did want to share with you, and I assume that people are interested in it a lot, is the actual types of products that we have authorized. And again, I won't read through every bullet, and I would argue that we're authorizing probably about, in 2021, 50 to 70 medical devices that include some aspect of machine learning. So this is a very small subset of it, but I tried to get a little bit of a cross section for you. But this is the type of tech that our group is responsible for assessing both the safety and effectiveness of. And these types of products have actually received authorization from us. So notable examples, we had some breast density assessment and cancer probability scoring from DBT images, so digital breast tomosynthesis images. Really interesting one, clinical decision support in major depressive disorder. And the likelihood of patient response to medication. That was a fun one. Hypotensive event prediction in the OR via measuring vital signs. So this patient, there's a 60% chance this patient will crash in the next 5 minutes. Very interesting. There was a triage tool using EEG analysis for mild traumatic brain injury. The objective there was to attempt to make informed decisions for the use of head CT in the emergency department. And lastly, here on the last bullet, we actually had a COVID-related CAD for lung radiographs that was actually authorized under our special emergency legislation that we operated given the current pandemic situation. So I'm really proud of our technical team that assessed these products, but they're novel, right? They're different from what we're used to. There really isn't any precedence for them, nor are there any kind of international standards for the companies or the regulators to lean on. So in the next couple slides, maybe what I'll do is I'd like to go through some of the topics our technical teams need to consider when assessing these products. So those of you who are developing tools that will have the goal of commercializing your product, this is kind of an education piece on what we expect innovators to consider and innovators to show us when they want authorization to sell in Canada. So I would argue, especially over the last 3-4 years, we're actually quite experienced in making regulatory decisions for AI products in healthcare, or AI/ML, machine learning products in healthcare. What do we look at generally, right? And note the word some. I even put it in italics, some, because obviously we look at so many other items, but just some of these things that are sort of machine learning specific, right? Firstly, bias, or more specifically, sort of the quality of the training data, right? It's so critical. And as a regulator of these products, we need to be assured that the product will perform acceptably and equally on Canada's very, very diverse population. I'll talk about bias a little bit later on. Performance metrics, pretty straightforward, right? We have to ensure that it's tested appropriately, right? Is it being used to detect cancer in an urban center like Toronto? Or is it being used to rule out a risk fracture in a remote community, right? Those are two different examples, but they're very different in terms of clinical scenario, clinical impact, and clinical risk. An acceptable performance will greatly depend on how it's intended to be used, right? Interoperability, huge, right? We need to consider that the AI is integrated appropriately into the end user environment without any unintended consequences, right? We're hearing from our Canadian kind of AI leaders in our AI hubs that, put an algorithm or a model in a different environment than what it was trained in has a high likelihood of not performing as intended, right? So we have to be sure that when we say, this product is safe and this product is allowed to be sold in Canada, I need some reassurance or assurance that product in urban Toronto will perform just as well as in a rural or remote community. Okay, and finally, fostering innovation. This is a big one in digital health, right? As a regulatory group, we need to balance safety, right, while also sort of facilitating market access for these innovative products with appropriate regulatory oversight, right? If we set the bar too high, we won't have any of these innovative products in Canada. So we need to find that balance. What I'll do is I'll unpack some of these concepts a little bit, but I'm gonna move pretty quick because I'm gonna be essentially recapping kind of what I said on that one slide. Again, foster innovation. I ended on that. But I included here this little figure, which I love, the sort of 6 levels of automation intended to describe autonomous vehicles. This is sort of a transport kind of figure. But I see huge parallels in the AI medical world to autonomous vehicles and these levels of automation, right? In cars, we started with cruise control. Again, maybe I'm going to show my age a little bit. Maybe I'll show my age even more. We had cars that didn't have cruise control. Now, and then after we had a little bit of cruise control, now we have adaptive cruise control. We have lane keep assist, assistive braking, right? Tesla's autopilot, for example. In AI-enabled medical software, it appears to me and us at Health Canada, it's following the same trend. Industry is building our trust in these systems, right? We're not seeing those fully autonomous surgical robots, but we're seeing diagnostic supports that do not replace a trained physician, right? Perhaps our medical products are kind of level 1, level 2 on the scale, where it's sort of like, assistance or partial automation. I'll skip effective regulation. I'm going to talk a little about that at the end of the slide. Training data. I don't need to say how critical or crucial this is. Extremely important for our reviewers, right? How reliable and representative is the training data? Can it be generalized across Canada? And without going into specifics, this Nature publication, which I love, again, very old, 2016, 2017, 2018. I have it on my slide. It was trained to detect brides. Right? It was very effective on images that resembled the one on the left, and not effective or not as effective on images that resembled those on the right. Why? Well, it was trained on a global data set. So what's the problem? Yeah, but that data set was biased in favor of North American images, right? So it's finding that bias and identifying it and mitigating it. That's one thing that our reviewers, our scientists are very concerned about. Moving on, verification and validation. Those of you who are in software development know that there are specific methods to verify and validate software, deterministic software. Well, how do we best test these algorithms? Should they follow that standard software V&V, or should they be challenged with an independent test set? Again, we know what direction we want to go in, but again, that's not definitive, and some innovators don't know that. Performance metrics. I kind of harped on that a little bit before, but what's critical? High sensitivity on a diagnostic support algorithm, maybe high specificity. We don't know. Well, it depends on the clinical context, right? So that those performance metrics are very, very critical, right? Operating points, depending on what you're trying to do and what your intended use is. And interoperability. I won't spend too much time on that. I mentioned interoperability. This one, this figure though, which is I love. It's from a relatively famous MIT tech review. Goodfellow, well known in the community, was able to show that the algorithms can be perturbed or tricked. Right? If you gave a specific image detection algorithm a picture of a panda, then added some structured noise to it, the algorithm was tricked into classifying the panda as a given. I like to show this in the sense to show that these algorithms are easily perturbed, or at least they could be easily perturbed, and so our reviewers are concerned about that. Standards, limited standards. Standards work is ongoing, but there's limited standards in this space. Ethics, and although Health Canada has jurisdiction over safety and effectiveness, right? We still need to acknowledge the importance of ethics and some of the policy decisions that we move forward with regards to ethics. So it's something that is top of mind for us. And in this particular figure, is actually, again, coming from the Canadian Association of Radiologists. Essentially, from an anonymized head CT, they could render a person's face, calling into question sort of the privacy of the data set. And lastly, and here's a big challenge, and this is where I'm going to focus the next, 10, 15 minutes, is adaptive algorithms or continuously learning, right? Performance that can vary in time after a product's been authorized, right? That's a difficult problem to solve. Put yourself in our shoes, in the regulator's shoes. How can we authorize a medical device today, based on it being safe and effective today, when we can't characterize what it's going to be like tomorrow, right? What if its performance drops tomorrow or next month, for example, right? And in Canada, our regulations are written in such a way that if a medical device is significantly modified, then that product needs reauthorization. And that's a huge regulatory barrier for machine learning, for innovators, for regulators as well, and ultimately, and most importantly, especially near and dear to my heart, patients. It's really, really important that maybe some of these continuously updating or adaptive algorithms, fingers crossed, their performance goes up. Their diagnostic accuracy, for example, goes up in time, right? So why would we want to stifle that? Why do we want to say no, lock it down, and it's not intended to change, right? We don't want to do that. So I'll get to that in a couple slides. One thing I did want to highlight, AI machine learning is a file that we've been extremely active on. We've had extensive engagement across Canada with various stakeholders. We're an active member of more than one group with the World Health Organization's AI for Health focus group. We have led a Canadian delegation to the G7 on AI product evaluation, and a couple, that was actually a joint Health Canada and Public Health Agency. So we led that, and we actually have a couple G7 papers hopefully coming out in the new year. Notably, at the end of October, aligning with other leaders in the field, we actually published a joint statement with the US FDA and the UK's MHRA on good machine learning practices in medical device development. I've added a QR code on this slide, and I encourage you to check it out. If you don't have the QR code, it's very easy to Google. It's on the FDA site, Health Canada site, and the MHRA site. We're active members internationally in a group of medical device regulators. So that's when sort of the US, Canada, Japan, Brazil, Australia, and other jurisdictions get together and try and harmonize their approaches. We're active members in those groups as well, talking about AI in medical device development. We have a scientific advisory committee in digital health, and we speak to them often on AI. And while we had to shift our resources quite a bit during the pandemic, we're going to be continuing our work on developing industry guidance for locked AI-enabled medical devices. So we are extremely active on this front. And again, there are benefits to Canada by actively participating at the international level. I'm going to only spend one slide on this because I do want to get to the sort of continuous learning aspect. But I thought it was important to share with you some of our ongoing work, and really, we really wanted to kind of inform industry about what our expectations are when it comes to kind of locked AI algorithms. So we are planning a guidance document to industry that will likely include definitions, something we've seen today is very important, make sure that we're all sort of speaking the same language. As well, we're considering to have recommendations for industry and developers and innovators on what we want to see. And actually, we want to see a lot. Descriptions of how the algorithm was developed and trained, how obviously the indications for use, or how it's intended to be used in a clinical environment. We want to see how the algorithm makes its recommendations, maybe not in every case, but we want to at least endorse and encourage a term called explainability, fully understanding the pros and cons to both sides of that argument. Risk analysis is extremely key for us, not only in AI products, but in medical devices in general. But we wanted to look at kind of things like, the risk associated with a false negative, false positive. Automation bias is something that we're very interested in. Alarm fatigue, and many other things. The last thing I wanted to highlight on this slide is transparency. What type of information is provided to those trained users? I'm using the radiologist, or maybe the oncologist, the radiation therapist, for example. How it relates to performance, right? In a diagnostic algorithm, is it 90% sensitive in detecting disease? What if it's only 70% sensitive, right? Well, we want the users to know all that information, right? So that they can make informed choices on how to use that tool. We want to make sure that they know what it can and cannot do. So we actually sit on a group at the WHO level, at the World Health Organization level, on documentation and transparency. But this is something that Health Canada is encouraging, is making sure that the user knows what the limitations are on the product. Okay, so challenge, and I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes on this one, and then we'll open it up to questions. So up to now, I alluded to Health Canada authorizing machine learned algorithms, right? Not machine learning algorithms. And on the left is the current state of AI regulation. By the way, these are not my figures. I included a link at the bottom, but I really like them. So left is the current state of AI regulation, right? The model is trained. The innovator or the manufacturer asks us for authorization. They then deploy that learned algorithm to the market. If that algorithm is retrained, it needs reauthorization, leading to weeks or even months of delay for approvals, and most importantly, delaying Canadians' access to innovation. On the right, that's the ideal scenario. The algorithm has access to data it learns, and fingers crossed, improves and benefits the healthcare system, right? And patients almost instantaneously, right? The challenge is that how do you regulate a product that varies in time? I mentioned that earlier. In the current framework that we have, we can't foster that improvement, right? We can't authorize something today that will be different from tomorrow, or be different tomorrow. So in Canada, we like to look at what other jurisdictions have done. So the next two slides are sort of what other leading jurisdictions have done. And in the spring of 2019, the US FDA came out with a discussion paper on a proposed regulatory framework for adaptive algorithms. And this is a really busy flow chart from this document, but I really only want to highlight the orange blocks. And essentially, the US FDA is proposing, and I'm on now orange block on the top right, right? They propose that a company's quality or their ability to make a quality product is assessed somehow. Okay, so that's step one. Step two, orange block number 2, and I'm in the middle left, right? The product is assessed normally prior to market entry, right? That's what we do day to day. That's my job, is pre-market assurance of safety and effectiveness. So that's that. Step 2 is kind of normal. Here's the key hint. It's the next step. It's orange block number 3. So the one right in the middle. In parallel to the normal review or the normal pre-market assessment, the innovator submits a protocol on how the product will change over time. So not only the protocol, but also the end stage of what the end product will be following that protocol. And then step 4 is sort of the real world performance monitoring. So again, just looking at those 4 orange squares. So the key is really that algorithm change protocol getting approved. And that essentially means that if a company has an algorithm that, let's say, detects pneumonia on a chest radiograph and has a certain sensitivity and specificity, they could have a change protocol that says, with more data, our performance will change, and our sensitivity and specificity is expected to increase to a specific value or within an envelope. Then that product can be updated without regulatory approval, regulatory oversight, but not that another pre-market assurance before it gets sold, right? As long as it stays within that approved performance envelope, okay? This is an even busier slide, and forgive me, but in Japan, it's the exact same framework. And in November 2019, I was actually lucky enough to travel with some of my colleagues to Tokyo to learn how the Japanese regulator regulates AI medical devices. in September 2020, so almost more than a year ago, Japan actually passed legislation that says the exact same thing, or is the same concept as what I just previously described. Is that sort of they're calling it a post-approval change management protocol, right? Without getting into details, and you don't even have to worry about the flow chart here at the bottom. Japan is requiring the submission and approval of a change plan. Sounds familiar, right? If the company stays within that approved design envelope, the model can continuously train and change performance within those sort of predetermined specifications. And this flowchart was shared with me with permission by the Japanese regulator, which shows the old process above, which is a review, but at the bottom, it includes this change management protocol, and that's the you can see my cursor here. It's down here, and that's a submission of that change protocol. I'll leave it there on international thinking. What are we doing down here, domestically? Well, what are we doing about it? In 2019, a section of the budget 2019, included bringing innovation to regulations, right? Where the government laid out plans to kind of modernize regulatory frameworks to specifically to introduce novel regulatory approaches to accommodate emerging tech, right? Including the use of regulatory sandboxes. And in June of 2019, AI in medical products was specifically called out as a potential candidate for this sandbox. And actually, sorry, in June 2019, our legislation, our Food and Drugs Act, was modified to include the definition of what an advanced therapeutic product is, and that's key for AI for us. So I'm really proud that Health Canada is actually moving forward in developing a specific regulatory pathway for adaptive machine learning devices. Remember at the top of the presentation, we were tasked with kind of innovating some of our regulatory approaches. And my main message on this slide is to compare kind of what is currently done to regulate machine learning medical devices or AI-enabled products. And then at the bottom is kind of our proposal. So on the top right, it's a super oversimplified way of showing our concept. To get a product to market, the manufacturer has to ask Health Canada for approval. Health Canada looks at a submission. They allow the product gets a license, and then that product goes to the user. So Health Canada is the only way that product can get to the user. But consider a life cycle approach on the bottom right. Right, the manufacturer now has two ways to market: through Health Canada, like right through the middle. I think you can see my cursor, right through Health Canada to the user. Same method as normal, right? But has also direct access to the user from the manufacturer to the user, should they have an approved plan for this that has been approved by us, right? We'd maintain oversight in all of the areas over the product lifecycle. We'd assess the quality of the company and their machine learning practices. We would pre-authorize a future state of the product. We'd pre-authorize a method on their method, the innovator's method or the manufacturer's method, to achieve that future product, as well as we would enhance our post-market monitoring on that product. So I'm not going to pretend these are new concepts globally. I spent the last 5 minutes talking about the US has proposed it, and Japan has actually enacted it. So what are the benefits in Canada? We really see positive impacts here for the Canadian healthcare ecosystem with this proposal. Our vision is really simple. By removing some of the pre-market barriers and shifting an appropriate level of oversight to the post-market, we can foster access, promote innovation, test new regulatory concepts that honestly are pretty outdated when it comes to software and AI, and we can also align internationally. So a company that is getting authorization in the US or Japan also sees Canada as a market to come to, while doing all of that while maintaining an extremely high standard, the same standard or higher, and that's Health Canada's mandate, is protect the health and safety of Canadians. So we'd see benefits to patients, the healthcare system, innovators. We'd align internationally, and we'd maintain that oversight. This is my last real slide. And it's more of a request. It's a call, but it's a request for all of you. It's a call for increased collaboration among stakeholders, and I'm quite proud of some of the collaborations that we have now with healthcare providers, users, academia, industry. But I think there's always room for more. And I think in this sort of digital health world, working more closely, it has to be done. It's a necessity. On the right, I listed some questions that I've been asked in forums like this. And my answer is always the same. It's increased collaboration, communication, right? Picking one or two of them off here. What does a physician know, or how does a physician know the limitations of an authorized AI algorithm? Well, I kind of spoke about that a little bit, but in my opinion, right, the manufacturer and the regulator have a responsibility to give all the necessary information to the healthcare provider, right? That's increased communication between three groups on this Venn diagram, right? Another one pertinent to this talk, what are the regulatory barriers for industry in emerging tech? Just today, I highlighted some of the barriers, the regulatory barriers for us at Health Canada, and we hope to continue to hear what industry's barriers are to make forward progress on this topic. So again, increased communication between more than one group on this Venn diagram. That's it for me. So in closing, I truly believe Health Canada is sort of well poised technically to make sound decisions, safety decisions on these products. We have challenges like every other regulator, but we're very active on the global stage and are working to try and address that in our Canadian legislation. And we do have the regulatory flexibility luckily now, to address some of these problems. So I have deliberately included my email address on this slide. Feel free to contact me anytime. Happy to further engage with you or redirect any questions that I can answer for you. I want to thank you for your attention. With that, I'll pass it over to Ahmed. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark, for such an excellent talk and for giving a very good overview on the current state of AI regulation in healthcare. There's obviously an increasing need for applying AI to the world of healthcare problems, and I think as AI becomes more common, more powerful, more influential in our societies and economies, it is catching the attention of legislators and regulators. And indeed, as you highlighted, like certain aspects of AI already are regulated, and the pace of regulatory developments is accelerating. I think what you presented today in terms of AI applications you're seeing, the challenges, and how Health Canada is paving the way for more AI and machine learning medical devices is extremely useful to the community, and especially for our early stage entrepreneurs and companies as they plan the next steps they need to take to stay ahead of this curve. So thank you very much for that. Before starting the Q&A session, just a quick reminder that this session is being recorded. And again, if you wish to receive future messaging from Innovate, please visit our website and sign up on our newsletter to stay in the know on our upcoming programs. Okay, so questions time. And I see we have received few questions. The first is, I think, about seeking authorization. So the question is, what if the machine learning algorithms are designed for operational and management efficiency rather than medical diagnostics? Do you still need to seek authorization in that case?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And that is, I would say, probably 10% of what I deal with on a regular basis is innovators asking, am I a regulated product or not? And it's not necessarily, we have an entire team. I even call them an army of people within Health Canada that determine and help with those types of inquiries. Just to answer that specifically, I think you had it on slide 3, that definition of what a medical device is. And if that doesn't satisfy, a product does not satisfy that definition of medical device, and no, it's not a regulated product under the medical devices regulations. Again, getting more specific to the answer, if it's sort of like an EHR data collection and not necessarily usage, or we've seen some sort of like emergency department queue management software, that is not diagnosing, preventing, or treating disease, or at least in our opinion. And therefore would not be a regulated product. But what I do recommend is, if you do have a question on am I a regulated, or do I have a regulated product or not, contact me, or I can provide a little bit of a. It's not me that's making that call, but we have a group responsible for helping industry determine whether or not they are a regulated product and what class they are. So remember, I had a class 1, 2, 3, and 4. Depending if you are a regulated product, it's like, well, what class am I? We have a group that to help with that. I also recommend we have a guidance document online. It's entitled Software as a Medical Device. So if you just Google software as a medical device, Health Canada, you'll find that guidance document. What that is, it's exactly this. It's in the software world. Are you a device? And if so, what class are you, right? So I would recommend going through that document first. If it's still kind of a gray area, come into us and we'll help you out, okay?
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very useful. So the next question is about, at our healthcare institution, we are often approached by companies looking to submit their Health Canada application, but they often lack any clinical studies or validation on Canadian data. Is this a hard requirement for Health Canada?
Again, this is an excellent question. So looking at medical device regulation in general, there is no hard requirement that you need that a manufacturer needs Canadian data for any type of clinical validation. So no, it's not a hard requirement. Now I'm going to put the machine learning spin on it. Are we concerned with a product that is trained and validated, analytically validated, in a jurisdiction that is not representative of our Canadian population? Perhaps maybe it's a very homogeneous population that's overseas. Perhaps it might be a very diverse population that just does not match our own. So in the machine learning space, no, it's not a hard requirement, right? It's not a checkbox that you need to meet to come in our door. However, we will be asking about the representativeness of the training data set as it relates to our Canadian population. So I don't fault those innovators or manufacturers that are looking for Canadian data, because in some cases we ask the manufacturers to demonstrate to us why they believe their training data set is representative of our Canadian population, and they can't, or they have a hard time sort of objectively describing to us what that is. So then the option 2 is then, okay, then validate it in Canada.
Perfect.
I hope that answered your question. So no, it's not a hard requirement for medical devices, but for machine learning, it's something we zone in on, and we typically ask for it when not provided.
Thank you, Mark. Next question is, how is AI being handled for in-house developed algorithms? So for example, if a research team at a hospital has developed a model and wants to use it as part of a clinical trial.
Yep. It's super great. And I don't have the names of people, so I'm just going to tell you that there's a huge regulatory IQ there. So whoever asked that question really knows their stuff. So thumbs up. I don't know who that is. I'm not watching the chat. So in-house developed trials. So we operate on the sale of medical devices. So in our Food and Drugs Act, we don't regulate the use. That's a provincial matter. We don't regulate the development of. We regulate based on sale. If you have a license, a medical device license, you can sell your product, right? So you can transfer that product. So it's not sell, not in terms of money, but you can transfer that product to another entity. That's considered sale. When we start talking about the development of medical devices, including machine learning algorithms and software inside hospital walls, we then have to call into question, well, where is the sale? Now, we do have provisions in our act that with regards to conducting a clinical trial, and that's a different verb. That's not sell, that's conduct. So it's a very, very difficult question to answer. I am not the regulatory authority on interpreting the law. I'm a physicist. I make sure everything's safe. So what I suggest is whoever asked that question, we have another discussion, a one-on-one discussion, specifically talking about the product and how it's being used within the walls. And I'll bring in our clinical trials people as well, and some of the interpretive or the people that interpret our act and regulations as well. So it's a really good question, and there are multiple different answers to that. But great point.
Thank you very much, Mark. So the next question is for treatment planning related applications. So for example, radiation planning, is there a higher burden on the manufacturer to validate the algorithm if AI is used more than other methods, for example, like physics-based methods?
Yeah. Is there a higher, there's definitely a hyper focus on, and you're not going to find this in regulation. You can't look at the law here. This is my team focused primarily on a technology that is not yet clinically established. Is it in use clinically? Is it are we almost there? I think so. But from a regulator's perspective, there's a little bit more caution. So the onus is a little bit more on a manufacturer using, and I'm going to even generalize my answer, using a non-clinically established method. Okay, and some may argue with me that, of course, AI in radiotherapy planning is established, and I agree that it's been around for a few years. Especially when we start talking about segmentation that a trained dosimetrist is looking at, for example. But it's not as clinically established as, let's say, an edge detection method. So when someone says, hey, I use an edge detection method and here's what my deterministic software does, great, thank you very much, show me that it passed and testing and we're good. When you start saying that, oh, well, we used a CNN and for segmentation, and the downstream effects are actually for radiotherapy, it's like, okay, we just have a couple questions. So I would argue that, yeah, there's a little bit more focus on and a little bit more onus on the manufacturer to demonstrate to us that what they're doing makes sense. So would I have the same answer 10 years from now? Probably not. But it's kind of a new technology that's not yet established. Everyone has their own methods and their own way to solve a problem, and we're just making sure that kind of case by case, and everyone's doing what they should be doing.
Okay, thanks, Mark. The next question is, how do you deal with machine learning that is largely developed at a black box learning environment where you can't necessarily explain what the algorithm has learned? So, for example, like matrix math and statistics.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. So I think it depends. How do we deal? What a great question. Case by case. I'll start right there, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to umbrella the answer with the government answer, but it really makes sense from a scientific perspective. It depends. It depends on what the product is doing. If you have a really low risk product, you're using machine learning, and the output is to assist for a primary care physician in making some low risk decision, or maybe even just providing them with some information, right? Do I care as much as if you are using, an algorithm to detect and not only detect breast lesions, but now give the interpreting radiologist a probability of malignancy, right? Those are two different scenarios. So I would, first of all, in that latter scenario, I would expect that the innovator is able to tell me how they train the product, on what data, a good description of that training data set. On the other scenario, let's say we're using an ECG analysis and it's giving some low risk interpretation. Well, if you use, let's say, an open source database and you kind of just point to it and say, hey, I kind of use that one. It depends. And it also depends on risk mitigations as well, right? It all depends on how the product is designed. Oh, well, here's a risk and here's how we mitigated it. So it's a really good question. I wish I could give you more answer than it depends, but I think the best answer I can give you is that if it's in a higher risk scenario, we would not accept the innovator saying, I don't really know what I trained on, and I'm not sure how I got there. We would say, we need better. Hope that helped.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Just mindful of our time, we'll just take one more question. Has Health Canada come across AI systems which employ site-specific calibration of algorithms? And if so, what has been learned?
Awesome. Great question. I'll be really brief because I know we're at time. This is one of the motivating factors for some of the later slides that I talked about sort of like the flexibility we need to authorize a product. I'm a carpenter with a toolbox, right? When an innovative company says, okay, well, at this clinical site, I want to do this, or I want the trained physicians or the trained users to do it here, and the performance is going to be different at clinical site B versus A. I don't have the tool in my toolbox to allow that to happen, right? So we kind of have band-aid solutions where we don't want to stifle innovation. But that's what we're trying to solve with a lot of our regulatory agility work, is that I want to be able to approve a product that's sort of naive, that can be molded and shaped at clinical site A and clinical site B differently, and still keep tabs on the performance of those two products that are performing differently within that sort of approved performance envelope. So we have run into it. We are trying to solve it. We are using the best tools we have in our toolbox to solve it. Like I said, hopefully we can solve it in Canada to again get those products licensed and in the hands of users who need them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. Again, it was a great discussion, great talk. Unfortunately, we'll have to end the session. I know there are some people who have more questions, but please feel free to email Mark. He has left his email, or you can email us and we can forward these questions to Mark. I'll be happy to connect you with him. Thank you again so much, Mark. It was a real pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, and thanks to our attendees for joining us. Happy holidays, everyone, and we are going to see you all in the new year. Thanks, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
You too.